This is Jocko Podcast number 142 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
S.L.A. Marshall could be a braggart of the first order. I could write on toilet paper with a crayon and sell it, was a routine boast. But his favorite claim to fame was at first the most puzzling to me, and years later the most significant in terms of unraveling the hustler and the phony that he was, and how he was nonetheless able to make such a mark on the U.S. Army. Slam regularly brought up the fact that the Army had made him a general despite his never having attended even one military school, and that he was the only general in the Army to have this distinction. He neglected to say, and never would have had I not followed it up out of sheer curiosity, that he'd gotten his star not in the regular Army, but in the reserves. Meanwhile, with no reason not to believe him, I accepted Slam's story of World War I, his experiences as an infantryman in all the major campaigns, his battlefield commission to become the youngest second lieutenant in the U.S. Army during the war, the romantic tale he spun of Armistice Day when he saw in the end of the war sharing his canteens with his brigade commander in the trenches. With no reason not to believe him, I accepted Slam's tales of World War II, too. His participation in the fighting in the Pacific, as well as his service in Europe, which had him in the front line of the Normandy invasion. It would be many, many, many years in which Slam repeated the stories endlessly, in which his reputation was only further bolstered as one or the other appeared in everything from Current Biography, 1953, to the obituaries upon his death in 1977, and in his autobiography published 2 years later before I would discover it was all a lie. Slam had been an enlisted man with the 315th Engineers 90th Infantry Division during World War I, and spent his time not fighting as an infantryman, but repairing French roads until just before the war's end. He had not been battlefield commissioned, and he wasn't anywhere near the trenches on 11 November 1918, being instead at the Army France-based Officer Candidate School, then called Infantry Candidate School, the self-proclaimed youngest lieutenant in World War I, who in fact never served an officer in any outfit, regular or reserve, in any capacity ever, was not commissioned until April 1919, long after the last angry shots were fired. According to his service record, Slam saw no infantry combat in World War II either, although he was awarded a CIB for the Marshall Islands campaign while serving on the DA staff. And far from being on the ground from the earliest hours of the 6 June 1944 Normandy invasion, Slam didn't even arrive in the European theater until July. And then it was as a staff officer / historian reconstructing the operation. And while Slam would speak with pride of being the only American soldier to serve in all 4 of America's great wars in the 20th century, it was a claim more than a little deceptive. His Korean War experience covered exactly 3 months, December of 1950 to February 1951, when he was recalled from the reserves to active duty as a historian / operations analyst for the 8th Army, a stint for his country that produced The River and the Gauntlet for himself, and his service in Vietnam was undertaken as a 6-year retired reserve general and a 40-year experienced journalist. Slam's job when he wasn't wearing a khaki, looking for a story on the Army's tab. A historian as careless with his own history as Slam Marshall was could hardly be a careful historian, and Marshall proved the rule. Veterans of many of the actions he documented in his books have complained bitterly over the years of the inaccuracy or blatant bias. With it all, though, the truth was that Slam was a fallen and irrevocably smashed idol in my eyes. He knew I'd grown away from him throughout our time together, but it was not something to discuss. I cherished my career too much to risk getting on his bad side, and I was opportunistic enough to see the value of my staying on the good side. But there must have been many like me whose silence in the face of Slam's power only added to it. and gave credence to his dubious expertise, who allowed him to have an absurd amount of influence, which fed his ego and lined his purse, and for years did an incalculable, horrific disservice to the Army, the thing he professed to love above all, not to mention to the nation and to the men who fought and died in Vietnam. When General Johnson had warned me, take care with Slam, he is the Army's powerful friend, but he can be a treacherous enemy. I had not understood what he meant. But when I finally did, I understood too that the Chief of Staff had gotten it backwards. The reality was that Slam Marshall was the Army's powerful enemy, because he was its most treacherous friend. And if he were alive today, perhaps even more than the Vietnam-era generals who determinedly maintained we won the war we lost in their hands, Slam Marshall would have plenty to answer for. That right there is a section from my favorite book, About Face, by Colonel David Hackworth, and he's talking about his experience with a guy by the name of S.L.A. Marshall, otherwise known as Slam Marshall, and that's a pretty devastating opening. I mean, that's a pretty devastating opening. You can hear what his career was. So there's a lot of negativity around S.L.A. Marshall.